Hi there folks, in today's demonstration I'm going to show you how we can import tasks into Planner using Power Automate, but not necessarily the tricky bits like the notes and the checklist items and the attachments. I've done that in a previous video, which I'll include in the description. Today's video is all based on logic to handle different groups and different plans. So if you're ever creating tasks that need to go across different plans, different groups, how can you do that dynamically? Well, that's what today's video is all about. I'll show you step by step with an example. We're going to take an Excel sheet with some example tasks. We're going to filter them based on a date, and then we're going to fire them out to different plans and different groups based on a column within that data. And then if that's not enough, as well as building it using an Excel sheet, I'm going to show you how easy it is to move it across onto a SharePoint list. So as always, please make sure you like and subscribe. And without further ado, let's jump into the demonstration. So to set the scene, I'm going to start things off in an Excel file that I've created here. I've got two tables. The first table has got a list of tasks, and in that table I have a job date, and I'm going to filter on that date. So any jobs that meet today's date, I'll bring into my plan based on a filter in Power Automate. We've got some standard things: task ID and task description, start and end date, who it's assigned to. Now this is an individual that I've assigned it to here, but this could be the planner name, individual groups. The aim of the game here is to match up who it's been assigned to based on this name with this additional table that I have here, that whilst it's on the same sheet, it could be on a different sheet, it could be in a SharePoint list, it could be anywhere, but the purpose of it is to link the assigned group or person to this assigned table that has the important information of a group ID, a plan ID, and if you need it, an email address should you want to assign those tasks to a default person. I've also got a bucket column so that if we want to move one of those tasks that we create into a bucket in that specific plan, then we can do so based on this name. So with that out of the way, we're going to jump across onto Power Automate and we'll get started, and we'll do so with a list rows present in the table. So we saw in that Excel file, I have two tables, the first of which is my tasks that I want to import and filter based on today's date, and the second which has that additional information based on the group and the plan ID. So I'll pick out my location, my document library, and that file that contains all the data. So I'll also show you how to do this with a SharePoint list. Once we've built this with our Excel sheet, we'll do exactly the same thing just by moving it across onto a SharePoint list, and we'll pick up any of the troubleshooting as I make that change. So I'll pick my table as well, which in this case I've called table 1, very appropriate, but this is the one with the main tasks, and I want to filter based on an OData query, and all I need to put in there is the name of the column, so we can have a look at the sheet. The name of our column is the job date, so I can type in that as job date, space EQ for equals, two single quotes, which gives us the ability to provide a string, and then in those single quotes we're going to use the UTC now expression, which will get the date and time, and we need to provide a format. So the format is quite important. It needs to be in this ISO 8601. I've got a couple of videos on dates. We can put that string in there, 4 Ys, hyphen, capital M's for month, hyphen, and then lowercase d's. That'll get us the format. The last thing is to make sure that you've set the date time format at the bottom here to ISO 8601. And that will now enable us to filter those dates and just bring out those tasks that we want to import. So the idea behind this is you might want to schedule it once a day. You'll go into that sheet, it'll pick up those based on today's date, and then it'll distribute those tasks between those groups based on what we build up next. So our next step is again the same thing, a list rows, and that's going to get us our different group IDs and plan IDs. So I'll just go and set the location and the document library again, back to my SharePoint site 365. We'll go into document library, pick out that file again, and in this case I've got a table called planner assigned. Nothing to do here. You don't need to worry about filtering or changing the default date format for this table. And like I said, this could be a SharePoint list. Now with that in place, what we really need to do now is we need to discover how many different plans we're going to be writing to, because of course we might have 15 different plans, but we might have created tasks that just involve 2 plans or 3 plans or 7 plans or all 15 plans. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use one of my favorite actions, of course, the select, and we're going to take the value, which is the rows from our table. Now note, we've got list rows present in table 2, and we've also got list rows present in table. I want the value from the list rows present in the table, which is of course our first action, so we'll choose that value there. I'm going to put my select into text mode, and then all I want to do is to select the assigned. So I'll search for assigned. Again, make sure that I'm choosing that value from the correct action. So this one here called list rows present in a table. We'll click on that, and then what we're going to do now is we're going to use, again, one of my favorite actions, the compose, to create a distinct list of those groups. So there may be 15 tasks, but only 2 different groups in that list of tasks. We can use something called union, and with union we can combine the select with itself. So you'll see I've got the select, comma, and then the select again. I hit OK, and that will now take us from our 15 tasks with 2 different plans down to just those 2 different plans, or 10 or 15 depending on how many plans you've called in that particular day in your table. And with that, we can now think about looping through those 2 plans and creating the tasks. So next up is an apply to each. We are going to loop through those distinct plans, and if I go to an apply to each, I can insert the compose as an input. Now what I'm going to do at this point is just to save it and to test it, and we'll show you where we're at, what it's doing, and hopefully then it'll make some sense as we build up the rest of the flow. So if we run that as a test, we can have a look at the history output. Of course, the list rows is all about getting those items that are based on today's date. So if I look at the download here, we can see that the first task is our tarmac drive on the 26th. And if I look at the planner, we can see that first one here is the tarmac drive. So we've skipped or filtered out the building of a fence, which of course is on the 19th, all based on that job date and the filter in the action. If I look at the list rows in table 2 and look at the output here, that is just those assigned tos, the group IDs and plan IDs. Then the select, one of my favorite actions, you can see that I have myself listed twice, Dave's listed twice, we've got Henrietta and Lucy, so there are some duplicates in there, but we've taken a list of all those tasks, we've pulled out the assigned, the name or the group name, however we might use it, we've turned that into an array of all the individual instances, and then in the compose, using that union, we've turned it into a distinct array of those values, so we now have just the plans that are involved in the tasks that have been selected. And then of course the apply to each won't see much, but there are 4 loops. So it's looping through Damo, Dave, Henrietta and Lucy. And for each of these plan names or groups, we're going to then go and create the tasks for those plans. And we're going to do that by looking up the second table, which is our table here based on the assigned, the group ID and the plan ID, which will then enable us to create tasks in the correct plans. So I'll put our flow into edit and we'll jump into our apply to each. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to filter. So we'll type in filter here. And what we're looking to do is we're going to filter those tasks from our first row or first table. So the list rows present in table, the first one, not the second one. And we're going to check to see if the assigned, so if I search for assigned, again based on that correct table, is equal to the current item. So this apply to each is looping through the array that we saw in the history that has all the individual plan names. We want to now filter all of the tasks that have come through based on the assigned. Is it equal to one of 4 different plan names, so the current item? And that's what this apply to each is. Each time it loops, it will filter, it will pull out just those tasks that relate to that current plan name. So now with that nice little filter in place, we also want to filter again, but this time based on the plan details. So we've got that second table. It's got things like the group name, the plan ID, etc. We need to filter again based on that name. So almost identical. We're going to filter based on the value, but this time from table 2. And we're going to again choose the assigned value from table 2. And is it equal to the current item? right down at the very bottom. And I'm going to rename both of these actions so we can easily see what they refer to. So this is filtering the array for the tasks that are assigned to a particular user or to a particular group, depending on how you're using this. And this one here is filtering in order to get the group and the plan ID. And that will allow us then to go and create the task in the correct group or the correct plan, because we should get one match based on that plan name. So with these two things in place, we can now add a couple of compose actions to get the group and the plan ID. So I'll add a compose here. I'll give it a name of the planner group ID. We'll go with planner group ID like that. I'll add in a second compose, and we can also give that the name of the planner plan ID. And then we can write some expressions. So we'll go planner plan ID. So jumping into the group ID, we have filtered and we should have hopefully one match. And with that, we can get the first and the only object or row that's been returned by this filter. And then we need to get the group ID. So if we remind ourselves, jump back onto this Excel sheet, I have called the group ID, group ID. I've called the plan ID, plan ID. No spaces deliberately to make things easy. And if I jump across back onto Power Automate into the expression, I want to get the first value from our filter array. So we've got our filter array that returns both the group and the plan ID. And we can put that into first. That'll get us the first and hopefully the only match. And then we put a question mark, square brackets and single quotes. And we can either get the group ID based on the name of that column in our Excel sheet. I'm going to copy that whole expression, Control C, and say OK. Then in the plan ID, I'm going to do exactly the same into the expression tab here, paste it in. Rather than group ID, I'm going to type in plan ID like so and hit OK. And so those two values, like I mentioned, are based on the column names in my table, in my Excel sheet. It would be exactly the same idea if they were text columns in a SharePoint list. So with that in place, let's again go and test it and make sure we understand what's happening. So with the flow almost completed, the beginning of the flow is exactly the same. We have the select, we have the compose. If we pop open that compose, we can remind ourselves we've got those 4 different groups. If I go into the apply to each, it's running 4 times. We're filtering the array based on the assigned to user. So we're taking all of the tasks that have come back, but then we're filtering on the individual at the, well, in this case, number 1, so demo. We're filtering for demo's tasks, and we'll see as I scroll through here, we've got demo's task here, and again we've got demo's task again, but no one else in this filtered output. If we have a look at the group plan ID, of course we've got all of those group plan IDs from that table, but we filtered based on demo. So we've managed to get my group plan ID, or my group ID and my plan ID, and also the email address if we want to assign it to a particular email address. Then if we look at this output here, we have one output because there's one match. We want to get that group ID and we want to get that plan ID. And that's why we used first, because we've got one object in this whole array. So we get the first and only one. And then we call the individual keys by their names. So we've got group ID, we've got plan ID. And if I pop this open, I should hopefully see, yep, the group ID, which ends in F91. And if I pop open this one, which is the plan ID, you can see I've got the header that ends in the same here. So that's how we've managed to obtain the group ID and the plan ID. And if I was to go to the next loop, it's of course going to be based on Dave. If I go to the next one, it's going to be based on Henrietta. So we'll see Henrietta's tasks here. And again, we'll see we've filtered down to Henrietta's plan and group ID. And we can see again her group ID and the plan ID here. And then just to make things fail deliberately when we build out the rest of this flow, if we go to the final one, we've got Lucy. Now Lucy has a single task which is called break my flow, but in the group plan ID you'll see there's no output. And the reason there is no output is because in my table on the right hand side here, I have not put an entry in there for Lucy. So we can maybe have some basic error handling that will send you an email if the creation of a task fails. And then at least then you can have a look at, for instance, task 951, why has it not imported? So we'll have that as part of our solution. Back into edit. The next thing we want to do is into that apply to each, we want to list the buckets. So buckets are called by an ID, and often trip people up. So I thought it'd be an interesting thing to add also. You'll see that it needs a group ID and a plan ID. Bonus, we have a compose above with both those values. So I can use that dynamic value by selecting custom value here, and I can pick out my, hopefully, if I can find it, group ID. And if I go to plan ID again and enter custom value, I can see I have my compose from my plan ID too. So that's going to list all the buckets for this particular plan in this particular loop. So we're not calling it multiple times, we're just calling it for that one instance. And then, whilst I don't like nested apply to each's, it's needed in this occasion because we need to create individual tasks. So we need another apply to each. So that apply to each is going to be based on our filter array of tasks. So all those tasks that have been filtered based on that user, we want to add into this input here. So we're going to scroll down, we're going to look for the filter array of tasks assigned to user. There we go. We're going to use the body. That will get all our tasks, and then we're going to give this apply to each a new name. So we'll go and change it to apply to each task, because that's what it's all about. We're going to loop through all the tasks, and then the first action is going to be a filter array because we need to get the bucket ID. So that from is based on the list buckets, the value from the list buckets, and we want to check if the value name from that list buckets is equal to the name that we have in our table. So if we jump back across, we have a bucket column. We're simply going to be looking up this value as part of the loop to then get the ID of the bucket. And the way that we do that is we're looping through this filter array in this apply to each. So we need to write an expression. So we type in items because we're going through all the different items. This will retrieve the first one. So in single quotes, you put in the loop name, like you can see there. Our loop name is apply underscore to underscore each. Note that spaces are marked as underscores, and then task. And that will get us each of the individual rows, but we want to get the bucket name. So in this case, we type in bucket because that's what I've called it here, bucket, and we can hit OK. And this filter array action is going to get all the buckets from the list buckets. It's going to filter based on that name for this particular loop. Again, we'll hopefully just get the one match, and with that we can then get the GUID or the ID of that bucket when we create our item. So the next thing is to create a task. So we'll have a look for create a task. And the first two parts are straightforward. We have a couple of compose actions, so we can scroll to the bottom and choose enter custom value, and I can go and hunt down the plan ID, which is going to be here, the compose planner plan ID and the compose planner group ID. So I'm actually in the group ID, I'll pick the group ID. The plan ID is exactly the same idea. Into custom value, we can scroll down and find the plan ID. So there we go, compose planner ID, and select that. The title, I'm actually going to base it based on the task ID and the task description. So very much like our filter array where we created an expression based on items and apply to each and bucket, we want to create an expression now for both the task ID and the task description. And so it will depend on the names here. So we've got task ID, task desk, same for start date and due date. All we've got to do now is start typing out an expression. I can go into the edit. I'm actually going to copy this expression from my filter array and Control C, and that'll make my life a lot easier in this title because I can go into expression, I can paste it in, and I'm going to change bucket for task ID because I'd like to get that as part of this expression. I'd like to have a hyphen in the middle of it, so I'll put a hyphen there in the title, and I'd also like to get the task description. So again, I can paste in that expression, type in task desk, and hit OK there, and so that'll get me both the task ID and the task description with a hyphen and a couple of spaces. The bucket ID is slightly different. Of course, it's based on this filter array, so we can go into enter custom value, into expression. We've seen it already. We're going to use first based on that filter array above here, and we just need to get the ID. So to the end of that expression, question mark, single quotes, put in ID, and that will retrieve the ID from our filter array. Start and due dates. Well, hopefully you're following along. We just need to type in now our start date, And then if we go to due date, again, we just need to type in due date, and that of course is based on the names here. So start date, due date. I can say OK to that. And then this assign to users, I was assigning the user based on the email address that comes through in this table here. So you'll note I've got an email address here. You could have the email as part of this list if you wanted, but I thought we'd have a default email address based on the particular group that it's assigned to. And in order to get that, we're going to have to get the first from that filter array that we did right back at the beginning of the flow. We've got that filter array where we're filtering based on that plan ID here. We want to get the email field from that filter. So based on the filter array group plan ID, we can actually probably pop this one open, pop this one open here, Control A, Control C in order to get our expression for the planner group ID, and we can go in here, paste in our expression, and rather than group ID, we could put in email. So the reason I'm doing this rather than using a compose is just showing you that you can also just type in expressions directly. So I can say OK there. I'm only using the email once. I've used the group and the plan IDs several times, so I put them in composes just to make it easy. I don't have to keep remembering that expression, but the assigned user ID I've used once, so I've typed the expression in directly. Either or is fine. So that gets us to the point now of creating tasks with a particular bucket for each of those individual users in that loop. So we're going through each of the individual plans, we're creating the tasks for those plans, and I mentioned that there was a scenario where Lucy has a task that is not part of a plan, so it will fail. So let's send ourselves an alert if it fails. So I can go into send an email action at the end here. I'll put in my email address so I get the notification. I'll just say creation of task failed. Now we might want to get the specific task ID, so we could remind ourselves, pop open this create task here, pop this open here, and we can see we've got an expression for task ID. We can copy that. You can equally hover your mouse over the top if you ever want to see what the expression is, and you can just type that in directly. But we'll jump back down to our send an email action. I'll go into my expression tab, paste that in. That'll get our task ID. The important thing here is we don't want this to send all the time. We only want it to send when the action above has failed. So we go into 3 dots. We can go into configure run after, and rather than it being run when it's successful, we can have it when it's failed, skipped, timed out, and so we'll get a nice little email if there's ever any issues creating those tasks. I'll put in a little body here to say that the task has failed, and then let's go ahead and test it. We'll let the flow complete, which should hopefully be reasonably quick in about 10 seconds or so. And we've got an error, which might be because of Lucy's task, but we can explore that. So into the apply to each, we know it's going to loop 4 times because we've got those 4 different groups. And we've seen all the filtering and the compose. Listing buckets is not very exciting, but the apply to each is looping through all the tasks for each of those users. So here I've got 2 tasks. If I go to the next user, they've also got 2 tasks. The next user, which was Henrietta from memory, if I pop this open, it is Henrietta. She's got a single task, which is plant trees. So if we have a look at the create a task, we can see it's task 321 plant trees, start and end time and her email address. So that's all worked correctly there. You'll note that the send an email action at the end has got a cross next to it. It hasn't sent because it will only send if it's failed. And hopefully, if we go to the last one, which is the one I'm expecting has failed, it is the one that's failed, but it's failed at a different stage. It's actually failed at listing buckets. So let's pop that open. Okay, so this makes sense, I think, in that the group and plan ID will be empty. If we have a look here and pop that open, yes, it is empty because there's no match, because we haven't got a table. What we can do here is we can also implement a send email action after this list buckets if it's failed to notify that we can't find a plan or we can't find a bucket. But ultimately, I'll leave that for you guys to explore, but it shows you how you can potentially use the send an email action after a failing action. And I do have a separate video on error handling, which I can include in the description. So the important thing to check now is if we jump across onto our planner for all of our different groups I have here, I have Demos planner. If I jump in, we should hopefully have a couple of tasks, one in week 1, one in week 2. And if we look at that here, we have week 1, week 2, tarmac, drive and cut the grass, which appears to match tarmac, drive and cut the grass. If we look at Dave's and we go into Dave's planner, he has got build a shed and build a wall, which is in week 1 and week 2. And if we go to Henrietta, we knew that hers is all about planting trees, but that's in week 3, so it's gone into the correct bucket. Now, just to demonstrate how easy it would be to link this to a SharePoint list, I have a pre-configured list here that has the job date, task ID, description, start and end date, and assigned to and the bucket. The assigned to is based on a text field, and there's a reason for that, because you'll have an added level of complication if you use something like a choice or the people lookup. So it is text just for ease, but I have got a choice column based on this bucket, and I'm deliberately doing that because I know that the flow will fail when we make the change. But let's have a look. So we'll go back into our flow, into edit, and we're going to replace that opening list rows present in the table with get items. So I'll add an action for get items, and that's going to be based on my SharePoint site and the list name, which I've called planner demo. And I'm going to do exactly the same as I did with the list rows present in the table. Remember that in the advanced options I had a filter query based on the date being equal to today's date. I can copy that filter query, go into advanced and paste that in. It matches entirely because the column name job date is the same in both of our SharePoint site and our Excel file. Now we need to make some changes, and this is actually a very good demonstration of why expressions are kind of irrelevant to the action as long as you've got them written in the same way. And so get items is obviously going to get an array of data back, which will include all of those column names, and I have job date, task ID, etc. They are identical to the names that are in my table in my Excel file. So if I go back into my solution here, I can go and delete the list rows present in the table. That will cause some upset later on down the chain. So our select is going to be upset because it's no longer got a value, and rather than the value being from the list rows present in the table, it's now going to be based on the get items. But the expression for its signed is exactly the same. So it shows that it's an Excel icon, but actually the expression hasn't changed. Compose, don't have to worry about because it's based on the select. The apply to each, we're now going to be filtering arrays based on a task. Again, we've lost the from because we've no longer got that data source for the Excel file, but we do have the values for the get items. So again, we can replace that. The group planner ID, I still have that coming from the same table, same sheet. We could of course move that. I'm not going to do that in this demo. Listing buckets, exactly the same. Applying to each task is exactly the same. Creating a task is exactly the same. The only thing we're going to have problems with is, like I said, with the choice column. So I have the buckets based on a choice column. So I am expecting this filter array, in fact, this filter array here to fail because the expression is based on the value called bucket, and actually when it comes back as a choice it comes back as an array. But we'll have a look at that and we'll run it and see what happens. So I've not really had to change much. I'm going to save and test that. We're going to of course end up with lots of duplicate tasks here, but that's not what it's all about. It's all about getting the items from our SharePoint list rather than our Excel file. If we look at the apply to each and we go into apply to each task, everything has worked in fact. But if I go into one of these tasks, we'll go into my demo again, we'll have a look. I can see that these tasks have just gone into no bucket because it hasn't picked up the bucket. I can also see that we're missing the task description, so something strange has happened there too. And I can tell you why that is also. So back into the run, we're going to go and try and fix the bucket and also the title. The thing to start with actually is probably to have a look at the get items. So we can have a look at the outputs here. If we look at the outputs, we can go and have a look at a bucket, and we can see that we're retrieving the bucket and the value from the bucket, and that is an object, but we actually want to get this string here, week 1. So we're actually looking for an expression that will get bucket and then value. And so that's what we'll have to go and change in our flow, in that expression in our filter array. The other thing is our description. It's missing. And if we have a look here, I can see Tarmac Drive, it's based on title. So I have renamed the default column that comes in the list called title. I've renamed it to task description. And so of course my expression is still saying task description. I need to update it to title. So 2 changes in this. If we go into edit, the first one is our task description. If I have a look here, we've got task desk. Now this has now saved. This is a dynamic pill. I can't edit the expression, but if I highlight it, I can use Control X to cut it, and I should be able to paste it back in. There we go. Task description. It's no longer task description. It is title. You'll see it's added a squiggly bracket at the end. I need to get rid of that, or you'll get an error message. And it's also added an at and a squiggly bracket. Again, I need to get rid of that, and then I can say OK. That's now going to get us our title, which is our task description. And so with the bucket, what we need to do is we need to update this expression to, rather than it calling out just bucket, it's bucket/value, and that's based on what we see here, bucket and then value. So it's not very easy also to edit this one. I would try Control-C'ing, Control-V'ing, all sorts. Oh, I have managed to get it, bucket/value, so we can put that in there. But remember, it's all about items, apply to each task, and then the question mark, square brackets, and then rather than just bucket, it is bucket/value. I've got an at the beginning here that I need to remove because I've copied and pasted. We can hit OK. And that's now updated, so that's now pointing to the correct location. And if we go ahead and test this once more, hopefully I will now have my tasks created in the correct buckets, including the description, which is the title, and then I think that's my demonstration done. So I'll jump back across. I'll have a quick load up of Damo's planner again. We can see some brand new tasks have been created now. They've gone into the right ones. Henrietta as well should probably have 2 in one. So we've got 1 that was failed, and then we've got 2 that have gone into the correct one. And if we have a look at Dave's, we can hopefully also see, yep, 2 in the incorrect, but also 2 in the correct, based on using that SharePoint list as our data source. Let me know in the comments below if you've got this scenario yourself. Have you managed to implement it using my video, or maybe done it slightly differently? It'd be great to hear from you. Make sure you leave those comments. Don't forget to like and share. And I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon on my channel. Thanks for watching. Cheers.